right at the top of Mount Everest, there's this place called the Death Zone.
And is this where a lot of mistakes are made in retirement too?
That's exactly what happens.
Oh, no.
That's where we can see people financially die 6 months into retirement, a year into retirement, because they did it incorrectly.
So tell me about this summit.
Okay.
Right? Well, what do we have to do? You said there's a lot of mile markers.
Yep.
I thought all was well once I retired and I didn't have to think about this anymore. What are people missing maybe?
So at the summit, if we go back to our Mount Everest story.
Yeah.
So right at the top of Mount Everest, there's this place called the Death Zone, which is aptly named because that's where a lot of deaths occur on Mount Everest.
And is this where a lot of mistakes are made in retirement too?
That's exactly what happens.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And where those mistakes are made in retirement is in missteps, retiring too early, retiring without enough assets set aside for retirement, drawing Social Security prematurely. My wife and I, we have a 2-year age difference. And so if I were to retire, if she retired, that's going to make sure that one of us is on Medicare prior to the other individual being able to have health care coverage. So not having proper health care coverage, drawing down retirement accounts too quickly, or drawing from the wrong accounts can be a major misstep. And that's where we can see people financially die 6 months into retirement, a year into retirement, because they did it incorrectly. I had a individual come to me this is probably 6-7 years ago. The husband and wife, they had done really well for themselves. The husband was a doctor. They had always made really good money, and they had set aside over $1 million for their retirement accounts. Well, when they retired, they went and they pulled all their money out of their 401k. They paid off their house that had a 3.5% mortgage. They paid off a cabin. They went and bought themselves new vehicles because they deserved it. It was their retirement gift to each other.
Absolutely.
This is exactly what you should do. Well, they went and did all of that using retirement money. And then they went to their accountant. And their accountant informed them that they had a $400,000 tax bill because of all the money they had pulled out of their retirement. Well, they came and then met with me at their accountant's recommendation. And unfortunately, they had done this 6-7 months before they ever met with me. And they said, Stephen, can we undo this decision? And Kristalina, and unfortunately, there was nothing I could do for them. And now, we still tried to help them. We walked through. They had to end up taking out a secondary mortgage on their home. Husband went back to work. But in less than 6 months of retirement, something they had worked 40 years to get to, they completely blew up their financial plan, and it was devastating. And so you've got to make sure that if you're making these big decisions, get people on your team to help you get a second set of eyes to make sure you're doing it properly.
Okay. I love that. So you've mentioned retiring too early, drawing on Medicare too late, too early, all the things, right? So in this dead zone, do I just need to be meeting those 8 times a year with my team, or what does that really look like?
I actually, so we flew up this morning to Salt Lake, and I sat by the kindest gentleman next to me. His name is Tom. And he was telling me these stories about how he likes to travel and how when he retired, he took an African safari. But then he also told me that he was working. I'm like, wait. Are you retired or are you working? And he's like, no, I'm working. I'm like, but you retired. He's like, yes. I'm like, okay. Why did you retire and then start working? He said, you know what? We thought we'd planned enough for retirement, but we realized we really like to travel, and we can't afford to travel in the capacity that we want to travel with what we planned on for retirement. And so as you think about that ascension side and the death zone, the summit, there's a lot of planning that needs to go into that, right? Sometimes we meet with people who we ask husband and wife, well, what do you guys want to do in retirement? And they look at each other and either one, have never talked about it, or two, we have vastly different stories being told by husband and wife. And it's like, those are conversations that we need to be having up into the summit and then through the summit to make sure, hey, we're still on the same page and we're still on target to do what it is that we're wanting to do. And it will shift, right? Maybe when we make a decision about Medicare or we make a decision about when to draw Social Security, that's not like a year that we write down and we stick with it, based off of health, based off of goals, based off of the costs of healthcare to bridge the gap but before Medicare. that number more than likely will shift over time just based off of outside factors, things that we're not planning on. So we plan for the expected, but we also plan for the unexpected.
I love that. That's awesome. So speaking of this right equipment, right, we've talked about all these different accounts that I'm going to have or vehicles as I make this ascension. What does that transition look like, right? In I'm actually retiring. I've made it to the summit.
So one of the biggest things you have to look at doing is making a transition with the way you're investing, with your lifestyle. So we talked earlier about that speedometer in the car. That when you're younger, you need to be driving 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. You need to be going fast. You need to be aggressive with your investments. But as you're getting closer to the exit, as you're getting closer to retirement, as you're getting to that summit, we got to start dialing back your risk. We got to slow you down. And so that would mean a reallocation of how you're invested. You need to change your focus from being purely on growth and accumulation to preservation and to income. So you've got to make that change. And that's an important decision, again, that can be done on your own with some research or through working with a financial advisor. But you've got to change the way you're investing. Another thing that you have to do as you're hitting that summit is to look at when are you going to start your Social Security? When are you going to start Medicare? The earliest you can start Social Security is at age 62. Your full retirement age right now is at age 67. And you can wait and defer your Social Security all the way till age 70. And by drawing early or prior to 67, you're actually taking about a 5% penalty each and every year that you draw prior to age 67. So you're looking at a potential 25% penalty for the rest of your life if you started Social Security at 62 versus at 67. And so that can be a huge misstep. And Social Security is a great tool for retirement, but it should not be the only tool that you use in retirement.
So I can't just rely on Social Security?
Unfortunately for us, there's going to be some funding issues with Social Security. If you're over 60, if you're over 65, 70, Social Security is going to be there. But for younger individuals, it's certainly not something we need to bank on or plan on. We need to make sure we're planning appropriately outside of Social Security.
Any other things I need to be aware of in that transition period from ascending to retirement?
Well, like Brooke said, many people, when we get them in, will say, what does retirement look like for you? The day after you've retired, you wake up, you don't need to have the alarm clock set, you can roll out of bed. What does that day look like? Well, if it's, I'm going to sit in front of the TV and watch, my favorite news channel for the next 9 hours, we've got a problem. And so we want to make sure that people have a plan when they retire, that it's not they're retiring just for the sake of retiring, that they want to have goals and things that they can continue to do, because those people that retire and then just sit at home, they're the ones that, unfortunately, we get a call from their spouse 6 months, a year later saying that they passed away. And it's just something we want to make sure that they're finding joy and being fulfilled in retirement, just like they have been while they've been working.
Yeah, love that. What are your thoughts, Brooke?
Yeah, Stephen brought up that you need to consider your risk tolerance, right, at that summit. But I would say that needs to be considered 5 or 10 years prior to that. We've known in the last 5 years, we had 2020, right, the great toilet paper shortage in March, where our 401ks dropped substantially and we were all scared we would run out of toilet paper. But if you were going to retire in March of 2020, that was where you marked on your calendar with your big red X, this is the day. Had you not reallocate or repositioned some of your portfolio, you may think, this is not the best time for me. And unfortunately, we do have people that say, nope, it's marked on my calendar, this is my day, I'm getting out. Not probably the most advantageous time to remove yourself from the market or maybe change things. That would have been better to do, properly position yourself prior to that. Both my parents, both retirement age. My dad retired in May and is loving it. That man is playing pickleball, floating, rafting, taking helicopters in the Bob Marshall. I mean, he is doing awesome things and loving retirement. My mom is about to retire early next year, and she had quite a few friends that retired in 2022. So the 4th worst stock market in U.S. history and the very worst bond market. And because they decided to retire in that year, a year prior, they could have walked away with this much. But because they chose, again, because it was marked on their calendar, they walked away with this much and then decided to reallocate. And so again, as you're getting closer to retirement, that's where we need to be pulling down that risk. So in the event that we have a market pullback, you're properly allocated, that you could still make it through and still have enough money to make it in and through retirement. So I think that lever of I'm making money, now I'm not making money, we need to pull that at some point, but we need to move that lever a little bit earlier in regards to your risk tolerance.
Stephen and Brooke, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I've learned a lot from you, and hopefully all of you who have joined us have learned as well. And we will see you on the next episode of Guiding You Forward.